Morgan Cars is one of the most successful car companies that's ever existed, to be honest, because obviously it started around the time the car was born. I mean, my grandfather, okay, was 10 years late, but you know, in 1909 he produced his first prototype, Morgan. I was brought up to believe that business was about invention, really. I sat at my grandfather's knee, and he was, I think, 59 when I was 8, and I loved him. He was a wonderful man. Originally, I think he thought it was a way of bringing mobility to the masses. So I think he thought it was a way of actually making cars available to the common man. And he was fantastically successful and a very rich man, because his business was massively successful because it was a great product. It was unique. My father then took on the business as a sole trader, which means that he could have lost what's called the shirt off his back. So quite a tense period for about 3 years while he was a sole trader. And then he was allowed to form a limited company, which means that as a limited company, of course, he is not personally responsible for every debt. But he was always very interesting because he always looked at the bank statements every month to make sure that the money coming in to the company was slightly more than the money that was going out every single month. And he taught me that, you know, that's the thing to do, is to, you know, forget everything else. Just every month look at the bank statement and make sure that it's plus. I think what's specific about family business is you're born into it. So you're sort of, you know, every breathing moment you are thinking about whatever it is that the business is about. You feel that it's your baby, I suppose, and your destiny. I mean, I say I was born in a piston. I think my father, even more than I, was sort of born to build a business. You know, he saw, I mean, he was born in 1919, so he saw Morgan when it was tiny and growing, and he remembers things like the machines in the workshop and the noise they made, because he lived next to them. So he remembers it almost viscerally, not as a business, but as something that, you know, he lived with. And I was a little bit the same. I grew up to go down to the factory every week, and I loved the fact that Morgan used wood, because it had this big sort of warehouse full of planks. And as a kid, I used to love playing, you know, thinking I was in a house in the planks, in these big planks of wood. And I love the smell. And so, yeah, I think you know, family business, you sort of live in it. You don't. It's not a business outside of, you know, you are part of it. In a family business, you can have passion, which comes from your childhood and your knowledge. Passion means that you have the, you know, the will to work harder than most people. So I think family businesses, you know, are great because I think people work really hard in them. And I think they also have an atmosphere, and the atmosphere comes from, you know, the fact that it's a family. You know, Morgan, for example, you know, regarded its workforce as part of the family. The values built by my grandfather were not the same as the values that my father had. And the values that my father had were not the same as the values that I had. And of course, now it's the 4th generation. The values that the 4th generation have are not the same as the values that I had. So I think, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you know, businesses have to change. I mean, if a business does not understand the world it's operating in, you know, it's dead. or it's, going to die. So, every generation, to an extent, has to change the business. I know that in Morgan's case, each generation contributed a massive amount to the success of the business. My father, as I said, had to run it almost as a startup. So when my grandfather died, because he had 4 sisters, the business went back to being, tiny and being, a startup. And as a result, he had to, define a strategy that I think was unique in the motor industry. Every business has to reinvent itself every generation. And so, to an extent, when a family business is 4th generation, if you think about it, there are many, many, many shareholders. Becomes more like a traditional business, really. And so, it has to fulfill the 2 things, which is that it has to make a profit, it also has to innovate. And, business is about creation. It's not about just plodding along. Successful business is about creation. And I think family is about creation, obviously. So that, I think that if you can combine that with successful business practice, then you have a great, great future. I wanted to make a new Morgan. I wanted to make a better Morgan than anybody else had ever made, with all the best technology, all the best things in it. Better than a Porsche, better than a Ferrari, better than any British car. And so I was involved in the development for 5 years of the Morgan Aero, which was actually a groundbreaking car. And I was very happy, actually, because it was a wonderful combination of many, many talents and many, many people very, very clever in the automotive business, and lots of new technology. My greatest achievement, if you like, was going to the Geneva Motor Show, which is a small motor show, but was, in the automotive terms, very prestigious, and is where everybody launches their new product. And actually show a new Morgan, which had not happened since 1936. Technical director of Jaguar, Land Rover, came on, Bob Dover, and he spent 1 hour looking at the chassis, and he said, "This is the future." And immediately afterwards, Jaguar adopted the same construction technology, bonded aluminium. So we were the first. Life is about failure. I mean, actually, to be honest, if you don't have failure, you'll never succeed, because you only learn from your mistakes. I mean, Niki Lauda, who's just died, famously said, to forget winning. It's about when you don't win that you learn how to win. So, and that's absolutely true of business, and it's absolutely true of life. Is that you've got to fail in order to succeed. I've always believed in the future, so I've always wanted to look ahead. I have never looked back and thought that was the greatest time. And Morgan's still there. There aren't many. Mercedes, I suppose, but it's tended to play things right. The niche that Morgan should operate in is probably rather similar to what it's operated in the past. I think that it's important now, though, to be very environmentally responsible. And so ethically, I think the company should continue and improve on its environmental credentials. So Morgan has to be clean and not, although it can't be completely clean perhaps unless it's totally electric, it has to not damage the environment. Has to be fun to drive, because that's the DNA of Morgan. So it has to be more than a means of getting from A to B. It has to be really good fun. And lastly, I hope it should combine some of the craftsmanship that has gone into Morgan over the last 100 years, so that people should find it an interesting car to build and to work on and to create, so that the people on the shop floor enjoy their jobs and actually enjoy building these machines that people will end up loving and keeping for a long time.